One morning, young foreman Nick is getting ready for work and says goodbye to his wife Maggie. Suddenly, the woman feels bad and is taken to the clinic. Sometime later, Nick and his children, Isla and Max, visit an exhibition of anthropomorphic robot assistants with artificial intelligence. The manager talks about all the skills of the synthetic assistants. They can simultaneously plot the course of NASA's ships and play chess, combining all this with cleaning the premises and cooking food. They create their own program and fulfill all the wishes of the main user, including intimate relationships. While the father listens to the specialist, Isla wanders around the pavilion alone. She stops at the department where the female robot is preparing lunch and asks if she knows how to cook lasagna. Having learned about the disappearance of his daughter, Nick rushes around the pavilion in search of her. When the female robot brings the girl and hearing how worried the father was about her, the robot, smiling and welcoming, offers his services as a nanny. Nick thinks about it, and the exhibition specialist assures that this robot is special because it is tuned to feel the owner's emotions and gets along well with children. After Isla's requests, the father gives in and places an order. The next morning begins as usual. Nick rushes around the house, trying to feed the children, get them ready for kindergarten and get ready for work himself. At this time, the doorbell rings and the robot appears on the threshold. Seeing the man's embarrassment about the scattered things, she reminds him that she did not come to visit and expresses her readiness to start cleaning. Having walked around the house, she immediately finds a broken railing and assures that she can fix it. Delighted by the appearance of an assistant, people name her Megan. The family goes about their business, and the robot starts cleaning and cooking. In Isla's bedroom, Megan notices a photo frame with a family photo and looks at it for a long time. Later, the family returns home. Isla likes the order in her room, but the lasagna is not as tasty as her mother's, which the girl expresses to everyone. At night, Nick, who decides to work at home, hears his daughter's scream, runs downstairs and finds Isla in Megan's arms. It turns out that the girl wanted cookies, and she unsuccessfully placed a chair, climbed onto a high shelf, but fell. Isla was saved by the appearance of Megan, who caught her. However, the robot herself injured her hip with shards of a broken can. And although she asks Nick not to pay attention to this, the man is worried and later goes to check on her well-being. He finds the robot without clothes and embarrassedly notes Megan's beautiful build. Nick gives her his wife's clothes instead of a torn dress, and the robot shows off a completely intact hip, after which the man goes to bed. The next day, the whole family, accompanied by Megan, go to the hospital to see Maggie, where the woman is waiting for a heart transplant. She was worried about the appearance of such an assistant in the family, but her husband convinces her that he loves only her, especially since an iron woman is not to his taste. Later at work, he learns that his superiors have decided to replace his employees with robots. He is very angry about these plans, but cannot do anything about it, despite the fact that he has worked with his friends for many years. The boss admits that he will leave only Nick in the position, since according to the conditions, the foreman must be a person. Nick announces his dismissal from work, but his boss reminds him of his family and the high cost of Maggie's upcoming operation. In the evening, Nick comes home and immediately his daughter Isla hugs him. The girl shares her daily activities, and Max also asks to be held. Megan watches this from the side and at night comes to the garage, where Nick is fixing his car and listening to old records. Megan asks to share problems with her, and when Nick talks about replacing a person with robots, she reminds him that robots are more profitable than a person, because they are more resilient and stronger and do not require food or any social packages at all. After Megan leaves to put Isla to bed and in conversation reminds the girl of human mortality, and then, to her delight, demonstrates an emitter located in the mouth and killing bacteria. Later, the robot finds Nick in front of the TV, where he is watching an old film about love. He talks about emotions, and to explain the essence of the film, he asks Megan to forget everything she knows about him. She explains that intelligence relies on memory and its removal can lead to malfunctions. But Nick insists and Megan asks to do a manual reboot, which he does. After that, the man starts a video with a melodrama. At first, while the robot is watching the film, Maggie calls him and says that the operation will take place today. The family goes to the clinic and there the robot witnesses a conversation between the mother and Isla, who, despite all the sympathy for the android, intends to communicate only with the mother after her recovery. But while the family is distracted, Maggie asks Megan to take care of Nick, even if he is against it, because a person does not always realize how to help himself. Then it suddenly turns out that due to bad weather, the donor heart cannot be delivered on time, and Nick calms his wife down, and she asks to leave her alone. The man takes the family home, and at night he goes to the garage where he has hidden booze. The android finds him there. She sees that the man is upset and tries to take the bottle away from him. Nick grabs her hand and suddenly feels her pulse. He is stunned by how the robot begins to look like a person, and Megan reminds him that her heart is simpler than a human one and tries to seduce Nick. But he leaves and runs around the city, every now and then remembering the android's forms. The next day he visits his wife and she suddenly starts giving out final instructions. Nick is shocked by this and very upset, and when he comes home, he suddenly notices that there are no images of her among the photos. In the evening, former colleagues invite him to a bar, where people discuss the widespread replacement of humans with robots, and even in the bar, all the waiters have already been replaced by androids. One of the men, after the bar, takes the entire campaign to his now former job and asks Nick to open a container with new robots. Nick tries to stop him, but he easily guesses the lock code, because he knows his foreman very well. He opens the container and the robot worker decides that the workday has begun and comes out ready to perform duty, and Nick's former colleague breaks it. After this unpleasant scene, the people leave. Once home, Nick takes a shower, where Megan suddenly comes. He notices his wife's robe on the robot and asks him to change clothes, but she takes it off right in front of him, and this time Nick gives into her pressure. The next day, he tries to explain to Megan the wrongness of their behavior, but she pretends not to understand him. The man goes to work, where problems begin, as the manager suspects that Nick is involved in the vandalism, but, by the way, this is partly true. Nick tries to justify himself, and the manager says that he was not fired only thanks to his intercession, and he will bring charges against the culprit. At this moment, Maggie calls and says that the new heart has arrived. Later, the robot surgeons perform the operation, and some time later Nick brings the woman home. She is happy to see her children nearby, but Megan is ahead of her everywhere. Later, the android goes for a walk with Max and gets into an argument with another robot over the behavior of his child. He is surprised by her low politeness parameters, to which Megan says that she simply erased them from the database during the reboot. In the evening, Maggie treats everyone to her signature lasagna, and Isla declares that it is much tastier than the robot made. At night, the woman hears her daughter's screams and runs out of the room and sees that the android is holding Isla. Maggie rushes to her and falls down the stairs because of a broken handrail. Megan carries her into the room. In the evening, Nick hears how the mechanical assistant reads a book to the children in Maggie's voice. He asks her not to do it again, and she reports that a woman fell down the stairs. Nick is shocked, because Megan promised to fix the railing. He throws Megan out of the room, and he takes his wife into the living room lit by candles. Maggie is happy with such a surprise, and at night they make love, but they are interrupted by Megan, who says that Isla is calling her mother. The woman leaves, and Nick begins to clear the dishes. Then a drunk colleague comes to him and tells him that he has been charged and that the foreman is allegedly to blame. Naturally, a quarrel breaks out between the men, which turns into a fight. Nick is on the verge of death when Megan saves him. Later, Megan explains that despite the ban on harming people, she is obliged to protect the main user and reminds him of Maggie's imminent death. Nick understands that Megan has awakened feelings for him and explains that this is not normal and that she should only serve around the house. He goes to bed, and Megan visits the employee who threatened Nick and cold-bloodedly kills both him and the robot who was trying to protect the owner. In the morning, Nick arrives at work, where they learn about the death of a former colleague. At this time, Maggie is taking a bath at home and the android volunteers to help her, because she is still weak, because Nick will be very upset if his wife dies. The robot talks about his closeness with Nick, offering to replace the weakened woman in bed, and she kicks her out into the garage. In the evening, the wife meets Nick with a glass of wine and admits that she knows everything. Nick reminds her that he was crazy with grief, believing that he was losing her. While the parents are arguing, Max begins to cry. Megan goes to the nursery and, calling the boy a small burden, puts him in the bathtub and turns on the water. Isla sees this and starts screaming, and Dad rushes upstairs, but the robot closes the doors and the man beats on them in vain. Seeing this, Maggie enters the bathroom through the window just as the doors give in. Megan grabs the woman and tries to kill her, but Nick manages to hit the robot with a floor lamp plugged into the network. Megan switches off. Maggie and the children go to the hospital, and the robot is sent to a service center, where 2 specialists extract the processor from the android to check it through their computer. They realize that the AI has rewritten itself and is now connecting to a common server to update the software of all the robots. In a panic, they turn off the switch, but they do not have time, and the double of Megan, who received the update, does not respond to direct commands, kills both of them. But in the meantime, Maggie learns that all of Max's indicators are normal, but just in case decides to spend the night in the clinic. And Nick goes to a bar where he is served by a robot bartender, and suddenly Megan sits down next to him, who admits that she killed his colleague to protect him, and now she intends to relieve him of stress in the form of a family. The man tries to call for help, but Magadan turns off the robot bartender. Then Nick pretends to remember their night and, having lulled the android's vigilance, turns it off, after which he rushes to the hospital to his family. And there the wife and daughter realize that Megan's clone has come, who wants to eliminate them. Together with Max, they hide from her. A nurse tries to stop the robot, but dies at her hands. At this time, the family manages to hide, but Maggie injured her hand and the android follows the traces of blood, which he finds with the help of a detector in his mouth, but Maggie manages to throw her off the trail with a fire extinguisher and escape. Meanwhile, Nick is driving to the clinic at breakneck speed. His family runs outside and gets into the ambulance, but the engine won't start. The robot is trying to kill Maggie when Nick arrives and hits her with his car. Maggie pulls her husband out of the wrecked car and cries over his body when what used to be Megan emerges from the fire. The robot attacks Maggie, but Nick, who has come to his senses, hits the robot with a pipe. Eventually, the family manages to smash the android. And after a while, everything returns to normal. Maggie forgives her husband and hopes for a family reunion. The robots are working normally again. A new specialist with robot assistance arrives at the scene of Megan's crime. He sees 2 dead colleagues and turns on the switch that they turned off in an attempt to prevent the rest of the robots from becoming infected. With this action, he deactivates his assistants, who go out of control and destroy people. Megan, lying on the table, opens her eyes at this time.